Welcome to this meeting of Herefordshire Council's Audit and Governance Committee being held on Tuesday 25th of January 2022. For those present in the meeting room, if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building by the nearest exit and make your way to the fire assembly point in the car park. The agenda papers and other relevant information for this meeting are available for public viewing on the Herefordshire Council website. The Council is streaming this meeting live on the Herefordshire Council YouTube channel and is making a recording. To ensure that recording quality is maintained, please speak as clearly as possible and keep background noise to a minimum. Please ensure that mobile phones and other devices are turned to silent. Others are permitted to film, photograph and record public meetings, providing it does not disrupt the business of the meeting. If there are any members of the public present who do not wish to be filmed or photographed, please raise your hand now so that any such person filming or photographing may be made aware. Only committee members present in the meeting room may vote. We have a number of people in attendance as virtual participants. Can I request they use the raised hand function within the system if they wish to contribute and to introduce themselves when they are called upon. So, agenda item 1, apologies for absence. I believe apologies have been received from Councillor Matthews. Are there any other apologies?
All of the committee members are present, Chair. Yeah.
Thank you. Named substitutes. I understand that Councillor Sebastian Bowen is substituting for Councillor Matthews. Welcome once again.
Thank you very much.
Item number 3, declarations of interest. Do any members wish to declare any Schedule 1, Schedule 2 or other interests in any agenda item? Councillor Watson.
Yes, it's really just to note that item 11, I'm actually the ward councillor that covers Walford about the code of conduct. It's really just raising it.
Thank you. We'll note that. Any other declarations of interest? No. Moving then to agenda item 4, minutes. The minutes of the meeting held on 26th of November 2021 include the agenda at pages 11 to 19 for approval. No matters of accuracy have been notified to the monitoring officer. Are you content that I sign the minutes as an accurate record? Thank you. I note the committee's action logs attached to the minutes and an updated version has been circulated in supplement 2, pages 3 to 4. If we turn to that for the moment, I note that there are still remain 12 activities that have continued beyond their due dates. Now I appreciate that I believe Claire Ward is going to take the matter to management board tomorrow and try and get expedition of these overdue actions. So thank you, Claire. Is there any other comment from any other member of committee on this? I'd just like to thank Ben for what he has done to update a number of the actions here, which would mean that the document is more up to date than has been in the past. We'll hopefully have a more complete document to look at our next meeting. I record that I keep saying that, but I think with the move to management board, confidence. I've got Councillor Ginman and then Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I do start to wonder if the dates that we're putting in here therefore are unrealistic. I mean, that's the first question that I suppose one asks. If you're getting sufficient number of going over date, as they clearly are, well, are they being set unrealistically in the first place? And if so, I mean, for an audit and governance committee, we ought to try to at least have our own targets correct and finished. So I think there is that sort of fundamental question that I'll be setting things that are not reasonable if so, please can we make sure we have that feedback and we can work harder to get our side of this partnership in working properly arranged.
Thank you, Councillor Jinman. Councillor Watson.
Yes, so I was going to make a similar point to Councillor Jinman about unrealistic, timescales, and also to understand the problems, why they've not been resolved, and that would be really good learning. And I was just wondering about, might be a little bit pedantic, but in terms of reported complete, is it to be a date or is it to be just yes? Because for like Grant Thornton's, it's yes, whereas some others a date reported completed. So it's really just a question about consistency. Is it one, the other, or both? So thanks.
I think that's a good point. Ben?
To date, we simply put yes for complete, and then it moves to the other sheet in terms of the completed actions. Officers over the last day or so just added some extra dates in there just to confirm when those actions, as it's post publication, that they have been completed sort of since publication. In terms of the dates, they officers, action owners have been invited to identify their own dates, so they've identified their own dates that have now slipped. So clearly, we need to remind them to be realistic about that, whilst they make sure they expedite responses as early as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll move on to agenda item 5. Sorry, Councillor Watson.
Sorry, Chair. I'd just like to ask just one question. I think perhaps to 151 officer. Action 97 is in purple, so I think it's something that the clerk just updated in the supplement. So it was just something that, with my involvement at the Rethinking Governance group, that action potentially is being referred into that. But as we're sort of coming to the close, and hopefully having all of our work presented to full council, I'm not quite sure whether that is still the appropriate action or whether it perhaps should be referred to, say, the monitoring officer. So I just wanted to double check that action because it's new.
Andrew, do you want to pick up on that?
Chair, I'm very happy to. The action was to consider what this committee, the scope of the work it looks at. So I think it is probably not for officers to form that view. Appreciate that this action has been on for quite a while. If the working group isn't the right location, then we probably need to think about where the location is. But we can provide this committee with all the information you want. But I think we just need to be clear: is that the right place for it, and is that the most appropriate way to do it? Because this information does go to Cabinet and it is looked at by Cabinet.
Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, it's an area that does need some thought. I note in, I can't recall off my head which report, but there's been a recent report talking about the way audit committees are working within councils, which did highlight that giving the audit committee too broad a spectrum of responsibility detracted from its main focus on audit. I think that was, it's referred to within the Grant Thornton report, the external auditor's report that we'll get onto later. But on the other hand, it is an area of concern which interests, I know, a number of committee members. But Claire, perhaps you can guide us on this one.
Yes, just to assist, the committee will be aware that the audit and governance functions aren't at the committee today, which obviously was anticipated. So actually I think it is a good opportunity, let's try and use it as an opportunity to actually make sure that this item is considered by the working group and the committee, to make sure that the remit of this committee in relation to financial matters is clear. So I think it probably is in the right place, just happens to be timing but I think we can catch up on the timing.
Okay, thank you for that. In which case, agenda item 5, questions from members of the public. The committee has received one question from a member of the public for this meeting, and the response has been issued in supplement 2. A member of the public who has submitted a question has the opportunity to submit a written supplementary question or to join the meeting to ask their question. Can I ask the clerk to confirm whether a supplementary question has been received or to be put to the meeting?
Chair, no written supplementary question has been received, and a member of the public isn't present on this occasion.
Thank you. I do thank the member of the public for the question, though, an interesting point and one which those involved need to keep in mind. And agenda item 6, questions from councillors. I understand no questions have been received from councillors. Coming on to the, if we like to say, the body of our agenda today, I intend to reorder the agenda, taking item 12 before 11:10 in that order. I recognise that one or two people need to get away on time, and that we need to afford a good amount of time for discussion in agenda item 12. Hopefully, of the agreement of the committee to do that. Thank you. So, agenda item 7, the external audit progress update. The purpose of this is to provide the committee with a progress update of the work being undertaken by the external auditor, Grant Thornton, and a general sector update, and a slight update to the progress, to the audit progress report and sector update document has been issued in supplement 1, and this provides the updated hyperlinks which didn't work in the first issue, but all the other content remains the same. And do we have John Roberts from Grant Thornton on Zoom?
I don't think he's. Sorry, Chair. I don't think Mr. Roberts is on Zoom at the moment. But Gail Radcliffe has just joined us. I don't know if she can comment on the report.
Sorry, Gail. I've got a clear view of the screen, so I can't easily see who's on the Zoom call. Did you want to just provide a short introduction to the report?
Thank you, Chair. So I'll take the report as read. What the two comments I will make is that you will note on page 6 that the next deliverable to the committee is the auditor's annual report, which is this report will summarise communicate the key issues coming out of our value for money work. This work is well underway, and the report should be coming to the committee and management within the next month or so. And within this report, there will be no surprises. Issues have been found, but they're continuation of issues that the committee has discussed previously around capital and children's services. And the second point to note is that coming from within the sector update, coming from some of the work led by the Redmond review, John has shared with me a link which I can pass on to Ben for circulation to committee members around an update that was issued in December from the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, which is around measures to improve local audit delays and some of the key actions that will be coming out of that review. But other than that, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Gail. I had noted the action for the auditor's annual report by the 28th of February 2022. I presume it will be likely closer to the end of February than mid-February by the time it is released, as has been the situation in the past. Just a question on page 37 of our documents. I'm not sure what it is of the report itself, where you refer to the local authority COVID-19 pressures. It was interesting to look at the relative pressures of local authorities and other bodies, but what's obviously missing is to have the figures for Herefordshire Council to compare how we stack up against the average, as it were. Now, I don't know whether those average figures have come from Department of Levelling Up and local housing and I forget the acronym now, as it changes every three or 4 months. And I've seen the figures on their page, and again, that doesn't drill down into any granularity. It just talks about general figures. Are these figures for Herefordshire available, or is it a huge piece of work to dig them out? Do you understand where I'm referring? It's on page 13, I think, of
Page 11, I think, of the...
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's page 11.
Yeah.
That's relevant.
Page 37 of the pack.
Page 37 of the pack.
Page 11 of the
It's headed Local Authority COVID-19 Pressures, MHCLG, Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government.
So Chair, these figures have come from what was the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. I think the acronym you're looking for now is DULAC. I think everyone has settled on for the new name. So these are the average figures that have come from Central, but I'm not sure if Josie or Andrew, if you want to pick up about local figures and whether they can be provided.
I can't see Andrew, but I'm happy to provide an answer unless Andrew is indicating he'd prefer to.
Andrew's switched on his microphone, so he's getting ahead of you.
Sorry about that.
Chair, we provide a regular reporting update to the ministerial department, whichever we're calling it these days, of the information. So I can certainly happily share what we've provided. I'm not sure what government has done with it at their end in terms of producing their report, but I can certainly provide you, the committee, with a breakdown of the returns that we've submitted on that. And I see this is for 2021, so certainly have got last year's figures.
Yeah.
And we are in the process with the latest return for the current year is due on Friday. So by next week, I can give you the current year's position and the historic last year's.
Thank you. I think I could see some bits around the table nodding. Councillor Harvey, did you want to come in?
Yes, if I may, Chair. Just for information, the additional COVID pressures and any government funding that has been provided to offset them are also reported quarterly in the quarterly performance reports that come to Cabinet and are available to all councillors. So that's been reported throughout the last financial year and throughout this one also.
Thank you. Yes, that's a useful reminder. It was just to try and understand how we could compare. It's really, I suppose, getting the dates right. How we can compare how we're doing in Herefordshire as against the mass of unitary authorities. Although appreciating that the comparison may have some flaws in terms of the size of unitaries, etc., but nevertheless, it is of interest. But thank you for that reminder. Yeah. Any questions? Yes, Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really glad that you picked out this page because it's one that I was really interested in myself. And like you, I also went into the government website, but it was horrendous to find out any real detail to navigate the pages. I think what really struck me was, and please forgive my ignorance, is that Herefordshire is a shire county, and I'm assuming that Herefordshire would be a shire county in these. But again, there are no definitions, because we're also a unitary authority as well. So it's really hard to determine where Herefordshire fits, because actually I wasn't able to find any definitions on the actual ministry's website. And the other thing is that if Herefordshire is a shire county in this classification, and Councillor Bowen and we do often raise it, is about the rurality, about the stark figures between London and the shire counties in terms of additional expenditure. And I think there's been a fantastic recent report done by the Rural Services Network on the impact of adult social care in rural areas, and particularly shire counties. So I think that's, for me, a really good showing of how shire counties do have additional needs with their rurality. And lastly, it's I'm hoping that the shire county for business rates and council tax income losses is not zero, but those figures weren't available at the time. But again, there's no footnote to actually express that, it's just zero.
I think, and Claire will put me right, that our comparator really is the unitary authority. Yes, we're a shire unitary authority, I suppose, but the shire county doesn't include the district council responsibilities because they're part of a three-tier authority rather than a two-tier authority as we are. But sort of alluding to the problem of comparing unitaries, some are very large and others, like ourselves, are quite small, and in some instances we're probably smaller than most borough councils and certainly metropolitan districts. But the comparators in themselves are quite interesting, I think. Any other questions for the external auditor? No? Oh, Councillor Jim.
Yeah, can I ask a rather basic question, but it's looking at the extremely small print, which is always interesting in itself. Right at the beginning on page 4, contents, in which it says the contents of this report relate only to the matters which have come to our attention, which we believe need to be reported as part of our audit planning process. It's not a comprehensive record of all the relevant matters which may be subject to change, and in particular we cannot be held responsible to you for reporting all of the risks which may affect the authority or all weaknesses in your internal controls. I just sort of made me, having read that, go, okay, as an Audit and Governance Committee, how do we find those things which they've not decided to report to us, and how do we get that reassurance? I mean, it's a wonderful sort of opt-out clause, and I just sort of, I suspect it's one of those things that's every similar LLP partnership is putting in on audit, and that's what you have to live with. But it just raised in my mind the thought of, are we missing things because we're always assuming that they're picking them up? If they don't bring them to our attention, it's their choice that they don't bring them to our attention. So where's the checks and balances in that?
Gail, did you want to reply to that one?
Thank you, Chair. So first of all, if we identify anything as part of our audit planning process, which we think needs to be raised to your attention, we will bring it to your attention as a committee. We will obviously discuss with management first. However, in this instance, we can't offer full assurance over everything. So when we audit to a level of materiality. And I think the committee should take assurance from, as in totality, from all its assurance providers. So external audit, internal audit, and other mechanisms that you have that bring assurance to the committee as a whole.
Thank you. So the key point there is the word materiality, I think, that you are saying that if it is deemed, and setting that level becomes the important point from our point of view and yours.
And materiality is defined in value as well as material by nature. So if we found something that we deemed to be material by very nature of the event or the incident or whatever it could be, we would raise that to the committee as well.
Thank you, Chair. That sort of raises the point then how often we review materiality, because obviously this is something that is mutual in the sense that we're advised, but we've got to agree to set it at a certain level.
Yeah, it's set at a level, and we agree it once a year in the I think it's in the annual government statement where we set, where the external auditor will calculate what the value should be.
So, Chair, we will state our materiality for the next financial year within our audit plan, which should be coming to the committee in March.
Seems to me that that's probably a good opportunity just to review that particular point.
Yeah, it always raises an eyebrow because it's usually a much larger sum than we instinctively feel comfortable with, but from a financial probity point of view, it is what it is under the CIFRA rules, I suppose. Is that right? It's set essentially by CIFRA.
So the auditing standards define the methodology that we use, and then there are different benchmarks we can use, and as a firm we have an agreed approach that our regulators are satisfied that we are following the relevant standards.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions? In which case I don't think we have any recommendations or actions coming forward. I note the recommendation A, that the external audit progress update attached banks A be reviewed, which we've done. The committee determining recommendation it wishes to make to ensure the value of external audit work is maximised. I haven't seen any recommendations come forward.
No, Chair, just a couple of actions really in terms of grant funds and sharing that document, other key actions arising from review, and also the breakdown of returns in relation to additional expenditure on COVID-19. If you still want that, but as Councillor Harvey said, there are information in cabinet reports, but if you want to break down, you can see that.
Well, I think I had interest from a number of members of committee. Perhaps if the work involved, I think, is tying in our cabinet committee report dates to the dates that are relating to the specific. There's about 16 sets of data, I think, when I looked on the government website. It's comparing which of those dates, which of those sets of data ties up with the cabinet report, and I think it's probably it's beyond it's not beyond my ken to work out what those dates are, but possibly Josie or Andrew might be able to give us an indication for the most recent published data, and that would be helpful. Thank you. In which case, can we take the recommendation that we've noted the report and ask for actions as appropriate? Yeah, thank you. And we'll move on now to item 8, the progress report of internal audit activity. The purpose is to update members on the progress of internal audit work and to bring their attention any key internal control issues arising from work recently completed, to enable the committee to monitor performance of the internal audit team against the approved plan, and to assure the committee that the actions being taken on the risk-related issues identified by the internal audit. Similarly to the external audit report, there has been an updated document that includes the updated charts and graphics, which were not correctly aligning in the initial document, but the text remains the same as originally published. Have we got Jackie Gooding or Amy on the call? Jackie, do you want to just introduce this report and bring forward any salient features to the attention of the committee?
Yes, thank you, Chair, and good morning all. So this is the progress report, provides an update to members on the audits completed and informs you of any changes to the plan, including the proposed Q4 plan. Since my last update, 12 audits have been completed, bringing the total of 18 audits completed for 2021-22. 11 audits at report stage, and there are 15 audits in progress. I will say there has been a noted delay with the Green Homes grant, as the council has requested an extension to the scheme. And since writing the report for the committee today, the community testing grant work has been completed for January to September. And just to update the committee, as part of this work, we did identify an underclaim of just over £30,000. This has been notified to the UK Health Security Agency, and the council are hopeful of a positive response from them. For the 12 audits completed and reported in this update, 1 audit returned a substantial assurance, 1 returned a reasonable assurance, 3 were limited assurance, and there were 7 reasonable grant certifications. There were 5 priority 2 actions were agreed across the following audits, which all had limited assurance: educational healthcare plans, payroll and contract management. The findings and agreed actions, along with the implementation dates, are outlined in detail on pages 23 to 25 of Supplement 1. During this period, no corporate risks were identified. I would like to draw your attention to 2 further elements in the report. The first is the inclusion of the audit objective, those audits completed, and this is shown on pages 27 and 28. Obviously, this has been included following a request from the last committee meeting. And secondly, the thematic findings that we've highlighted on page 21. Thematic findings to date include the need to ensure policies, strategies and procedure documents are up to date, and issues with data quality of data from systems. Both these findings have been discussed at Management Board recently, and discussions commenced regarding the steps that can be taken to address these. These include document management tools to prompt reviews and updates and a swap audit relating to data management to be planned for the future. I would say that our planned work continues to be impacted by COVID-19, and in particular, additional audits have been added relating to grant, related to COVID grant determinations. Additional work relating to local authority community testing funding was completed in Q3, and you will see that both community testing funding and test and trace continues to go into Q4. The proposed Q4 plan is outlined on pages 42 and 43 of Supplement 1. I'm happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. And Looking to committee, if the committee anybody got any questions? Councillor Watson.
I seem to be first off the, thank you, Chair. Morning, Jackie. On page 51, could you explain to me, in terms of the reconciliation of the holding accounts for payroll, what is an acceptable tolerance? That might be a question for you or for Andrew. And the other question I have on this page is the preparation for adulthood protocol. Has that been moved across is that a risk register item? And has it been integrated into the activities for the improvement plan? And last but not least, I think on page 61, I just want to congratulate you and your team for the feedback score of 100%. I think that's absolutely fantastic. It really shows the staff value your input. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. In relation to the payroll finding, I have asked a question about the acceptable tolerance, but I think Head of Corporate Finance is with you today and will be able to provide you a bit more information on that.
Josie, did you want to come in there?
Yep, certainly. So we do reconcile these accounts. We've enhanced the checking of the reconciliation process. I think we talked about this before last time, my memory serves me correctly. With an acceptable tolerance, we monitor differences that are less than £100 on a monthly basis. If they exceed £100, then we take the investigation there and then, because sometimes the £100 goes up and down the following month. So the acceptable tolerance level that I think you're looking for the answer for is £100.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Just coming an additional sort of question on that then, in terms of when it talks about differences have been written off, do we know the quantum of differences which have been written off?
Absolutely, and I can share that with you. We do it on an annual basis, so we have a spreadsheet that breaks that down that I can share.
I think it would just be useful to visualise it, that quantum. The target date on that one was 31st of 12/21. Do we know if that work was completed by that date?
That's when the new enhanced reconciliation check-in started, right. And that has started. I can confirm we've had some staff absences, which have led to a slow start, and that's a sickness absence, but it has commenced.
Thank you. Thank you. Councillor Watson, were your other parts of your question answered?
No, it was, and again, excuse my ignorance, Jackie was wondering if the preparation for adulthood protocol has been moved towards the risk register or to the improvement plan activities that's currently going on in children and families. But this may be a question next time for the risk register and for the Daryl, the director.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Watson. The answer is I can't give you an answer on whether it's been reflected in the risk register or the improvement plan, but I can certainly go back and find out for you and send you an update on the information in relation to that.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. Just on the same page, I think there's some education healthcare plans with a target date at 30th of November 21. Do we know whether those actions were completed?
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Again, I don't know whether those actions have been completed by the target date. Obviously, you will get a report on performance against actions when the Head of Corporate Performance brings the report to you. But again, I can go back and check for you on that particular action.
I just, because the dates are recorded there, I just wanted to confirm confirm that that they have been completed. Thank you. Councillor Alderson.
Thank you, Chair. I just had, going back to some of Councillor Watson's questions, because they're very similar to the ones that I had on the payroll work. Just a couple of questions to help my understanding. So could you explain to me what a payroll holding account is? Because I'm not 100% sure how that works. And then in the internal audit report, it says that the level of possible errors, amendments required cannot be accurately estimated. However, senior management confirmed that they remain within acceptable tolerances. So I don't understand that sentence either, because if they can't be accurately estimated, I don't understand how there can be an assertion that they're within tolerance. So if you can walk me through that, that would be very helpful.
Okay, so we have an integrated system. So the payroll system is part of our general ledger. So payroll is live, it's not an interface. So the reconciliation is actually within the system. So when we pay HMRC, it's the records from the system that tell us how much to pay. And a manual intervention is then reconciling how that calculation reconciles to the difficult areas of sickness leave and maternity leave. And it's that manual intervention calculation where we've identified that there are minor discrepancies. So because it's a live integrated system, if an individual leaves, the live system removes that record of that leaver. So that's where the complication arises through a manual intervention to add back people who have left. So where we're looking at the reconciliation on the ledger and we're trying to agree with what the ledger has told us, we're seeing minor discrepancies. But what we're saying is, unless we looked at every single leaver, sickness leave and maternity leave, we couldn't say that on our list is everybody, so it's not a complete list. We know who's left, who's on sickness leave, who's maternity leave, but we haven't reperformed the calculations manually for every single individual because there's rather a lot of them. So that's where the holding code comes in, because the holding code should be balanced to nil. A holding code is a general ledger code. That's where all the ins and outs go, and it should balance to nothing. When you've paid HMRC and you've put all your payroll costs, it should be a nil balance, but it isn't. So that's where the reconciliation comes in.
Okay, that helps me a little bit. And so I also get the understanding that this is a relatively long outstanding issue. So I just wanted to get an understanding of how long this has been outstanding, because as an example, at last meeting, we had the previous internal audit looked at, internal audit looks at payroll every year, but in our last meeting, we had the long outstanding recommendations. So, and I couldn't see anything on payroll in what was reported to us in our last meeting, and I think it was November. So just, is this a long outstanding issue, and for how long? And if it is, why wouldn't it have been reported in our tracking document that we received in November?
It's certainly a long reconciliation procedure that we followed, and we've decided to enhance that going forward. To provide some reassurance to the committee, there is an external audit that reconciles the payroll entries as well. So you would have seen through the external audit reports that the committee received that there was no errors identified through their external audit of those works, but obviously they'd have looked at a different materiality threshold. So the SWAP internal audit looks at a far lower detail than the external audit, and that's why you're seeing recommendations through internal audit rather than external audit. But it is certainly something that we appreciate, that we need to increase the resources on spending more time looking at the reconciling items, and that's what we've started from December just gone.
Okay, and so, sorry, just from a process perspective, just so I've got my head around it, I apologise for all the questions, Chair, but has this been identified by internal audit previous to this year, is what I'm trying to understand, or was it only just picked up in this last internal audit? Because I thought it was a long outstanding issue, so it had been picked up previously, but is that not the case?
think I better leave Jackie to answer that because I'm not entirely sure on that, sorry.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. The answer is I would have to go and look at the previous reports to check, but my understanding is that this was picked up because there was a backlog of queries rather than perhaps it was a very long outstanding issue. But I may be incorrect, but I would need to go back and check that for you.
Because I just wanted to make sure that if it was an issue raised previously, it wasn't reported in our November. So Paul Harris, who puts together an update on long outstanding recommendations, we had a number of long outstanding recommendations, but payroll wasn't one of them. So if it had been picked up in a previous internal audit, I would have expected it perhaps to have been in that list, and it wasn't. So I guess from a process perspective, I just wanted to make sure that everything was working properly as well, because as Audit and Governance Committee, we rely on those reports to be complete. So if you're able to just double check, Jackie, I would really appreciate it, just to make sure that we have a level of comfort that our reports are complete that are coming to us. Please, thank you.
Yes, I would do.
Thank you. Yeah. Councillor Barber.
Thank you. And I think I'm probably following on a little bit in the same terms from Councillor Balderson. So I'm looking at page 61, which is page 13 of the report, on the internal audit plan progress. Just noting the typo on the first line of the conclusion since my last update, 12 audits. 3 from 2020-21, 9 from 2021-11 should presume to be 22. So just make that as an assumption that it's typo. But my main question, I think, well, I'm still not maybe understanding myself from this part of the document, is just how old some of these are and how often they do roll over, which is kind of, in a way, sort of trying to understand how these things sit in our and your audit work stream. And I still feel, and I think I've asked this before, I still feel like there needs to be a start date, if that makes sense, so that there's much greater understanding of where some things are waiting to be done. I think it's strategic partnerships. I think we've started doing some work on that in 2019, yet it's still rumbling around in places waiting for things to be finished. So it's for me, it's understanding the age of some of these things that roll over, and how often things tend to roll over on this list of quarterly reporting, to the point where, you know, do we have things sitting on here for more than 2 or 3 years, which would be a little bit of a worry to me. So that's my main concern about this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. I'm happy to respond to that. So the report that comes to you today reports on the progress on audits from the 2021-22 plan, and also the finalisation of audits from the 2020-21 plan. And yes, you're correct, those audits have taken quite a long time to finalise, primarily because of the impact of COVID and also trying to get the audit work started and completed. But they are completed now. In relation to audits rolling over, certainly this current year and the last year has been very challenging in relation to the impact of additional work due to the COVID pandemic. As you will see from our reporting, we've had to include a significant number of grant determinations, which we wouldn't normally do anywhere near as many grant determinations, and this has definitely impacted on the plan. What we do is we do bring to you the rolling plan, and you will see the Q4 plan is picking up on those audits that were deferred from Q1, Q2 of this year. So although we may not get to finish them or finalise them in this financial year, they are in the plan at the moment. Obviously this may change with potential additional work that again may come in the next month or the next couple of months, but we will obviously endeavour to do what we can to complete the plan. In relation to audits rolling over for 2 or 3 years, that does not happen. Obviously, we review the plan quarterly now, and we were reviewing it annually. So all those audits would be reviewed, and if it's still appropriate to be in the plan, we would include them in the plan. I hope that helps.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. And that was one of my next questions, Jackie, so thank you for leading nicely into it. Your note on the a number of amount of grant work that you've done, I note on page 30 of the supplement, those graphics I found very useful. And I know this is an issue that I raised at your last update, which was the proportion of grant work compared to the bread and butter internal audit work that needs to get done. And I'm really concerned that this has continued into this quarter, and I recognise we are picking up some more traditional internal audit work in the next quarter's plan. But if I just look at these graphs on page 30, not taking the grant certification into account, audits completed with limited assurance represents about 40% of the work so far for the year, and about 60% for this quarter, and I find that that's actually quite concerning for me. And I know last time, I'm sorry to keep banging on about this, but I thought we were getting the extra money through some of the grant funding to actually put towards the work done for the internal audit work that we need to do on the grants. So we should have extra budget to potentially do more bread and butter internal audit work. So I just wanted to sort of raise that again, and not quite sure who's best to respond, whether it's you, Jackie, or Andrew, but I'm still concerned that we're not getting the right balance, and our bread and butter internal audit work's just not getting done. And we've got quite a lot of limited assurance reports coming through.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. I'm happy to go first. I'm sure Andrew will want to make a comment as well. So in relation to the additional work through COVID grant work, obviously that still does support our annual opinion that we will give at the end of the financial year. The work we do is looking at how the council are managing the grants, how they're managing the money, are they meeting the right criteria, are they reclaiming sums that should be reclaimed? And as I mentioned earlier in my report, we did have identified an underclaim. So that does demonstrate the value of doing the grant work. Obviously, there has been an impact on the plan. We will have to be optimistic that perhaps going into 23-24 be a return to more normality with the audit plan, and the level of grant work will reduce. But at the moment, we don't have the additional capacity to bring forward any of the other audits other than the ones that are presented to you in the plan today. I'm happy for Andrew to comment as well.
Chair, I'd echo Jackie's comments. The activity the councils are doing for the last 2 years has been dominated by the COVID response and the work that has been funded by a lot of these grant activities. So I think it is appropriate that we have a general to look at what the council has or hasn't been doing in terms of those grants, because it has been a key part of the council's COVID response. It's outside of what you'd call a normal day job because of the very nature of it. So I think it is helpful, so from my 151 as well, to make sure that internal audit has looked at that. I think you make a fair point that there has to be a trade-off on the audit plan, has to accommodate all of this. In terms of the additional monies we get, it's new burdens money. I think I said before, it's not a generous allocation from government, so we're not awash with extra money. And we have, over the last 2 years, used some of that to buy extra capacity from SWAT. One of the challenges SWAT faces, we all face at the moment, is their ability to service work, and they've got all of their clients are asking exactly the same thing. So it isn't as if SWAT have an army of people waiting for work. So there is quite a difficult and complicated balance about how we deploy all of the resources we've got and SWAT has got.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Ginman.
Really just a comment on the fraud part of this, the appendix, because I think we all have heard last night that one of the government ministers resigned over the concerns about the fraud that had occurred. And it seemed to me that we've been trying, we've taken on a particular individual to do this work, and the reports to date had shown that we had recovered quite considerable funds. And I think to be applauded that activity is happening. And I think the comment that was made the other day that people who do defraud will be pursued is perhaps a public message that needs to go out from this committee as well. I think we were pleased to hear that that was the case. And I noticed that this work will be continuing because of the amounts of money, and has just been said, the amounts of grant and the amount of time that's had to be spent ensuring that the grant money goes to the right people in the right way for the right reason seems to me something that we should applaud and make note of.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Jim. The document you're referring to is the quarterly fraud update, which is an addition, I think, that came in a little while ago for our internal audit plan. We're going to come on, I think, in agenda item 9 to talk about our anti-fraud and corruption annual report. I think we're very much welcome you exploring some of those lines a bit further. Councillor Watson.
Yeah, sorry, Chair, I missed it. On page 67, Jackie, I was just wondering about the Heritage City Centre transport package investigation. I see that it's in progress, and will that be an outline or a detailed report coming to committee? And do you have a date when that will be, coming to us?
Thank you, Councillor Watson. Yes, the work is nearly concluded on the HCCTP and will shortly be issued to the Chief Finance Officer. Obviously, a decision following that issue of the report on what information will come before the committee will be made then.
Okay. So when you say soon, how soon?
Sorry, there are a number of reports that have already been issued because of the number of objectives that we looked at, and the final report will be issued this week.
Okay. And sorry, Jackie, is it an outline or is it a detailed report?
That will come to the committee. It will probably be an outline report that will come to the committee, but that will be a decision that will be made by your monitoring officer and Chief Finance Officer.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jackie.
Okay, I think the nature of the report might be reflected on the number of recommendations and the priority of those recommendations. That's an assumption. Okay, do I have any more questions at all? Internal? No? In which case then the recommendations that I have before me are that performance against the approved plan be reviewed and areas for improvement identified. I think Councillor Dodson, you succinctly delved into those and got some detail. Consider the assurance provided in the recommendations the report makes, commenting on its content if necessary. I think we've done that. The proposed fourth quarter internal audit plan on page 22-23 of the appendix be reviewed. The committee determine any recommendations it wishes to make regarding the level of range of activity proposed in order that the work carried out may give a satisfactory level of assurance over the Council's corporate governance arrangements, and indeed to note the corporate fraud update. I don't know, Ben, if you have any specific recommendations.
Not necessarily recommendations, Chair, but in terms of actions, I think that wanting information circulated on the quantum of write-offs in relation to payroll, the confirmation about the treatment priority 2 findings in terms of the risk register and the current status with some of those target dates for the identified actions, and also an update on the long-standing issues with reconciliation of the holding accounts, particularly in context of previous internal audit progress reports.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I noted those 3 actions. Is committee content with those? No recommendations going forward. Can I just have a show of hands if we're more content? Thank you. Agenda item 9, the anti-fraud and corruption annual report. I'd like to take this item and then have a short comfort break before we come on to where we'll move then to agenda item 12, jumping 10 and 11, rethinking governance. So, anti-fraud and corruption annual report is a report we get annually. Purpose is to provide an annual update to committee on anti-fraud activity. I've got Josie down as the presenting officer, but I'm sure Jonathan Nelson, our counter-fraud specialist, will be playing a part in drawing our attention to any specific items in the report, which I have to say I found a very interesting reading and slightly different from reports that normally come to committee, in that it is full of sort of relevant interest to the public at large, I think. And I don't know if it's yourself, Josie, or that's presenting this.
Happy to give a brief intro. I notice there's a hand up, or is that just on my screen, a white hand? Is that nothing? I can ignore that, can I? Okay. All right then. So this is the second annual report with quite a lot of detail. Since we've had the new counter-fraud specialist post for nearly 2 years now. A large volume of the counter-fraud post work has been in relation to the COVID support grants, as Jackie just mentioned. SWAP is seeing the same. So there is a little table in the report given a position of how many grants have been clawbacked or prevented from payment. So it's been really useful having our specialist on board for that work, obviously. The report also goes on to update the committee of what's happened in the last 12 months. So there's a new mandatory e-learning module for staff to complete. So that's raising fraud awareness throughout the authority. There's thorough service level risk assessments nearing completion. That's been a really useful tool. And you'll see that through the performance monitoring reports that this committee receives. There's a new informative intranet page for all staff and referral process for all staff, including Hoople and members, and referrals can be made anonymously. So we've seen that being utilised, which has been really good. I think paragraphs 19 to 22 of the report are really useful to see what success we have been able to publish throughout the last 12 months. Obviously, there's other cases going on, the details of which remain confidential, so you won't see those details in this report. But the report does share with the committee what's been achieved in the last 12 months in relation to targeting fraud in the areas of single person discount, in relation to council tax charges, small business rate relief in relation to business rate charges, and blue badge fraud in relation to parking. So there's quite a lot of detail in the report, and I think it's probably best if we just move on to questions now, if that's okay.
Yes, that's fine. I'll start because I've got the microphone, as it were. Paragraph 16, I think on page 75, talks about this new fraud referrals form sitting on the platform. I just wondered if we had any, how long it had sat there and whether it's been used at all, whether we have any frauds being...
Yep, so that went live in November. It has been utilised a handful of times, I must say. What is really good about it is referrals can be made anonymously, so we can encourage referrals, and we're hoping to roll that out through the public website for publics to make anonymous referrals, but we're not intending for that to go live. As you can imagine, there's quite a lot of processes and procedures we have to set up first. We're hoping that will go live in April.
Right, thank you. And the other area I wanted to refer to paragraph 22 and congratulate what I presume is Jonathan Nelson for being what is it, the finalist in the Outstanding Young Professional 2021 in Tackling Economic Crime Awards. So I think it's a great achievement both for him and for the kudos to the authority to be recognised in this way.
It's really raised his profile. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really raised his profile. It's been excellent, and the award ceremony was very interesting. I mean, the competition out there is fierce. There's some amazing counter fraud action going on nationally, and it was great to see Jonathan in among that.
Excellent. Yeah. Councillor Barrett.
Thank you. I'm not here very often, and you don't know who I am, but very nice to be here. I just wonder, do you get any malicious reports coming in at all? What is the sort of the way of making sure that malicious reports are not taken to the extreme and people are pursued and hounded, to their detriment?
Yes, there is a flowchart process that's published within the strategy and available on the intranet, so that we do wheedle out what may be considered malicious reports, depending what the nature of them are. So there isn't time wasting, should we say, through this new referral process, because we follow the flowchart that we publish to ensure that the right reaction to the referral is followed.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Yes, yeah, I also noted, I think it's just fantastic with the work that's been going on around counter fraud. And it was a really good report to read, actually, Josie. So thank you for it. It was really good, very clear and easy to understand. My other point for me is that the work that is being carried out by counter fraud specialist and the team shows the benefits of local government being close to it. With, as Councillor Ginman had earlier informed us, is that with the write-off of 4 or 5 billion write-off from counter fraud at a central government perspective, we're dealing on a much more at the coalface, and we can pick it up much more easily. And I just think that it really demonstrates the value of the work that the team does. So yeah, so I'd like to say thank you for that.
I just want to pass that on to Jonathan, because Jonathan constructed the report and he does a great job. So thank you for saying that. And I just wanted to note that it was Jonathan that prepared this report in front of you.
Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. And yes, fully endorsed those points, Councillor Watson. Well said. I just and it is a good report, and I love the fact that it really lays out, just don't try and defraud us, because we will come after you excellently. Yeah. So just drilling down into I suppose page 27 really, just trying to understand. So we've got the value of the work that we're putting in terms of how many cases that we've detected and what the amount comes to. So when it says on the FEN detected that it's 1.7%, I'm presuming that's 1.7% of all of the total value of the grants.
Correct. So we've included all discretionary and main scheme grants there. So a number of those grants would be through an application process, therefore they would fail at the application stage before payment, in addition to what you're seeing in the table.
Right, and that's kind of like, that would be classed as day-to-day at the front door.
Yes.
That. So in terms of the of clawing back what we or regrouping, getting back what actually got past us the first time at the first check, do we get costs? Do we get our time costs paid in that process, or do we have to internalise those costs? So
staff costs.
Yeah, staff costs to actually go through this process?
It's the same reference that Andrew made earlier, actually. So central government has recognised new burdens. There's a lot of demands against those new burdens. So we've utilised temporary staff, we've utilised overtime, we've utilised swap. We obviously have Jonathan and the team. So we've also had to make changes in relation to IT. So the new burdens has been recognised, but it's certainly been fully utilised in the grant work that's been required in its totality in reaction to COVID.
Thank you.
Councillor Watson.
Yes, sorry, I should have raised this point earlier. In terms of page 78 on our in our report pack, it's really just raising on paragraph 31 about the 5 new cases that were referred to the counter fraud team in 2021. I was just wondering if, and it's really where to put it. It's about, again, just raising it as a risk register in the adults directorate risk register. It's just, you know, to just kind of, I don't know where to write it or note it, or if I have to remember next time we look at it. But it's trying to work out if that will be on the risk register. It's something, and likewise with the blue badge fraud, it's something to be aware of.
So we do work closely with those departments. We also work closely with Paul Harris and his department. So you'll be aware that there's a new recording system that they're looking into and hoping to implement shortly. So what Jonathan works on is feeding into that new system. So we should be joining things up. We're not there yet, but that's where we're heading.
Okay.
Can I just add to that? Sorry, Josie. Good morning, everybody. Yeah, so I just wanted to add, we have been working closely with internal audit, SWAP, on the fraud risk assessment. So that will underpin our approach to looking at risk from a fraud angle, with the intention of that being into the new fraud risk management system. So it will be looked at and from the corporate angle as well. So the aim being is that it will look specifically on fraud, but it will tie in with the corporate risk register as well, or the service risk register as well.
Great.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions then from me. One, I suppose, probably goes to Andrew, and I remember we talked a while ago about this corporate fraud specialist post, and I'd like to ask what your reflection is on this report and how you think it's going. Is this where we're sort of going to get to, pre-stating that there's a kind of investment return or investment saving? Are we about right in terms of our sourcing of corporate fraud? I can imagine that there'll be those that say, you know, we should be investing more here and looking to make more savings, but there must come a time when the return diminishes. And the second question, really, while you're thinking about that, goes back to Josie. I mean, this report really warrants, I think, a press release. I don't know whether one's in hand, but you know, councils get pilloried a little bit about the way that they don't look after public money. Well, council authorities, the public sector in general. But I think this is a very good example of where, in fact, we've taken an initiative to do just that, and I think would propagate the news even more widely that you know, you don't try and defraud Herefordshire Council, because you will get caught out. So I think it warrants something creative to be released to the press. I don't know, Andrew, if you've got any reflection on this and the amount of things which have been uncovered.
Thank you, Chair. I join the congratulations to Jonathan and the team. They've been doing a fantastic job. And as with reflecting, if we didn't have Jonathan and his team here, then we would have had a very different report today about what's happening on the grants. For the last 2 years, the COVID response has dominated what the council has done. I know we've touched on that about the audit work, but there has been a large volume of activity. And if we remember, in the very early days of COVID, the response was to get the money out to business as soon as possible, and that's what we did. Jonathan and his team helped us do that in a way that was as safe as we could make it on there, and we are always exposed to people who will just outright lie to us, and there's people who will forget things they tell us, so that there is a balance. I think that the team has proven that they've done a very good job in managing that risk on there, raising the awareness across the whole council, including officers and members, and getting that message out to people that, if you think about defrauding the council, we're going to find out about it and there will be a consequence. As we've seen here, what Jonathan and his team has done and built some very strong links with all the other agencies. So Councillor Matthews, I know he's not here, but he a number of times asked me about, do we work with the police? His background as a police officer. Yes, we definitely do, and all the other agencies. So what you're seeing here is the top of the things that have been included, but there's an awful lot of ongoing activity that is going on where we've worked with people who defrauded us. Most fraudsters, if they can defraud us, will try and defraud other councils as well, so it's sharing that intelligence and making sure that we build those networks. Reflecting on, have we got the balance right about in terms of the support resource we've got? I think we have, but I think I'd want to look at this the year after the COVID arrangements have come to an end, because we've just touched on there's lots of other areas that the council team are looking at across the council, not just the COVID grants.
Thank you. Councillor Harvey, yes.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to echo the words of the committee here and say a huge thank you and well done on the counter fraud front. It's an activity which has to go on every single day. The council and its officers have to be vigilant every day, motivated, inquiring, detailed in looking out for, spotting, reacting to, extremely creative and ever-changing ways in which, people are trying to, defraud, public bodies, councils, other organisations of their funds. And I think, it's a real testament to the work of the team that we are as successful as we are at not just preventing fraud, but also in dealing with it when it has occurred and ensuring that as best as we can the money is repaid. And I think if you look in the agenda pack on page 77, the information that's there showing just what a tiny fraction of the business grants that we've been handling are awaiting repayment plans in terms of pending recovery. When you look at the total sum that we've been handling, that the difference between the 499 figure and the 149, which are already on repayment plans, that represents 0.3% of the total amount of money that we have handled and handed out into the business community to help during and other people to help during COVID. And I think it's a massive testament to the success, not just of Herefordshire Council, but I think of local government generally, in being able to do this, to do it fast, to get the money where it needed to go at a desperately difficult time. And it's been a real team effort. I'm only sorry that yesterday in the Lords we had a Lord resigning from his party whip as a consequence of the 4.3 billion write-off of COVID loans at government level, which he described the handling of which as being woeful. I think local government has done an amazing job by comparison, and I think it just counterpoints the difference between Westminster handling some of these sorts of projects and actually devolving that responsibility to the right level in government that can handle it properly at a local level.
Thanks, Councillor Harvey. We're fortunate to have Jonathan, whereas Westminster don't. Let's turn. Councillor Bolton, you want to beg your pardon.
Thank you, Chair. It was really just to pick up on everything that's been said so far and thanking Jonathan and his team for everything he's done. But one of the things also, I think, picking your point up, Chair, is we should publicise this as a deterrent to other people who try to defraud the council. People will continue to think they can get away with it. We've done a cracking job in getting things back in. The money's coming back in. As Mr. Lovegrove said, it's paying for itself. But we have to put it out there and deter people. People will continue to defraud in whatever way they possibly can. And they're always looking for new ways to get around things and to get money for themselves. But a press release, I don't know how that would shape up, but I think it should be looked at and put out there. Thank you.
Thank you. So support for a recommendation that the department should work with communications to put together a press release highlighting the success in countering fraud, which is accomplished over the last year, would be one of the recommendations. Councillor Ginman.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, having come in somewhat almost prematurely, but having mentioned it previously, I think with this report now, that course of action there's two reasons for it. One is to make the point that this is happening, but it's also going to be very important as we move into an era where more and more payments are by bank means and non-cheque means, which has been the lifeline for most people in the rural communities for years, that they understand that their council is providing as much security as it can. And I think this report, there's a tendency to look at the money that's actually been recovered. What is much more difficult, and I appreciate it's the part that Jonathan's playing, is putting in place systems of management to avoid problems actually occurring, the prevention side. And I think that side of it needs to have some emphasis for people to have confidence when paying monies into the council or dealing with that sort of route.
Thank you. Yeah. Ben, we've got, I think the one recommendation referring to a press release. Anything?
I didn't notice anything else. Yeah. I think Councillor Harvey has still got a hand up. I just want to check it.
Sorry, Councillor Harvey, did you want to come in again?
You're on mute, sorry, Councillor Harvey.
You are on mute at the moment.
Still on mute.
You're muted and your hand was up.
Oh dear, sorry, it was an old hand, Chair. I'm very sorry, I've removed it.
No problem, thanks. Okay, so sorry. So if I just have approval for that recommendation to be made, and I suppose a vote of thanks to Jonathan and Josie and the team. Yep. I propose to take. Sorry?
Don't you have to agree the main recommendation as well?
Sorry, Councillor Bartlett. The recommendation is the annual report be reviewed. The committee to determine any recommendations it wishes to make to ensure the anti-fraud work is maximised.
Okay,
Is that
they're two
and I think we've done. I think we've done that. I didn't hear any other recommendation coming forward. Okay, so I'd like to take a few minutes break, perhaps to allow us a comfort break and so perhaps to reconvene. Logically, I make these. Previously, I've made these breaks too short and struggled. So let's say we reconvene at 10 to 12. Give us 10 minutes. Thank you. And
Apologies, Chair, I will have to go at 12:30.
I appreciate that, Councillor Jim, and I'm just conscious of the comfort of committee members. Can I ask for the recording to be Thank you, everybody. Agenda item 12 I'm moving straight to, and rethinking governance, and the purpose of this is to consider the suggested amendments to the Council's constitution proposed by the Rethinking Governance Working Group for recommendation to Council. And I just draw your attention that supplement 1 includes the planning rules and code, pages 47 to 76 of the supplement. We're going to have a short presentation by Claire Ward, possibly ably abetted by Caroline Marshall. This work, which is obviously in great detail, has been produced by our Rethinking Governance Working Group, and a huge thanks goes to them for all of their meetings. I know that we've had the opportunity in a workshop to look at some of this, but I'd look to Claire just to refresh our minds on some of the more salient areas.
Thank you, committee. I'm really pleased today to be able to present this report to you. Although looking at the pack, there's quite a few papers here, it does underestimate the amount of work that the working group have put into this piece of work, which, as you recall, commenced 2 years ago when the council resolved to review our governance arrangements. Then a year later, it was decided we would stick with the cabinet model but improve what we've got. And that is what is now before you, committee, today to decide. You did have a workshop on the detail, and I will ask Kate Charlton to go through with you in a moment kind of those changes and where the matters you raised have been incorporated into the documents that you've got before you today. But I'll just take you through the as succinctly as I can what the changes are. So the group set out to undertake a review of our governance arrangements, and I think what's really important were there were some salient guiding principles, and those were to maximise member engagement and participation in decision making, to ensure decision making is informed, transparent and efficient, to welcome public engagement, to enable members and officers to perform effectively in clearly defined functions and roles, and obviously to assess any resource implications for the proposed changes. And I will say I've seen throughout the process that lens being applied to everything that we've looked at. That isn't something that's just been a tag on along the way. They have been the basis upon which this review has been undertaken. So the main changes are set out at paragraph 8. We have got an expansion of the scrutiny function, but not an expansion that is going to create more meetings or more work. What it's going to do is give a focused approach to scrutiny work, and I think the absolute gem of this is that it provides this council with a scrutiny management committee. And what that committee will do will be to oversee the work, to review effectiveness, and really key, will enable cross-cutting scrutiny work, which we've never been able to do before. So that's an absolute gem, I think, of this. We've got a review of all committee work going into full council at the annual council meeting to explain to full council and the public what each committee have been up to in the last municipal year and what actually has been the value of that work. That will come in as part of the operational changes that are needed in relation to what that report actually contains, but as a hook, as a function of council, we now have those reports going into council. We've also got the ability to hold question and answers meetings of cabinet, and also there has been a review of the questions procedure for the public. Our public participation guide had, I think, about 14 criteria for asking a question, either by an elected member or a member of the public, and over the years that has caused concern that actually we weren't welcoming public questions. We weren't set up for participating with the public. So we've really had to look at that to look at questions that are more appropriate and do not place a judgment on people when their questions are rejected. We have looked at the audit and governance committee functions, and I'm sorry they're not here before you today. There has been a new code, which I'm afraid the working group and officers weren't aware of, that has been produced, which we just need to review to make sure that we're on the right tracks in relation to audit and governance committee work. We're hoping that will come to you in February or March. It shouldn't delay the process, but that's just one carve out that we haven't been able to put forward to you today. You've obviously seen in the supplement a huge amount of work in putting together the planning and guide and code together, which is in the supplement. And then there's been some tweaks around the employment panel functions and other issues in the Constitution, which are tracked in the tracking document that show you absolutely every change that's been made, but are things that usually as your monitoring officer I would be changing frequently. It's just briefly in governance have been set up as a working group. I've been placing things in that to make sure it's all together. So you did have a workshop where we went through every page, didn't we, of the actual changes. And Kate, I don't know if you're there and you could just take through the changes that we've made as a result of that workshop, please.
Yes, Claire, and good afternoon, or just about good afternoon, members. Yes, I've got a summary of the changes that we discussed through your working group, and just to go through those and to reassure you where we've made those changes. First of all, other than those items that Claire has picked up this morning and those items that are included in the report, where I'm going to start is at section 2.6.4, which deals with the composition of members on each committee. There was concern raised as to the availability of members to sit on these committees, and that they would be politically proportionate. So clause 2.6.4 has been amended so that it says that each committee will comprise no more than 7 members of the council, and so that each committee is politically balanced. We then looked at clause 2.6.9, and that was regarding the clarity of scrutiny management board and their strategic direction and cross-cutting, and so that's been further expanded, and also a new clause added after clause 2.6.6. It hasn't yet got a formal number to it, which adds that the role of scrutiny is to influence council policies and shape policy whilst they're in development. In terms of then we moved on to the safeguarding, the joint arrangements, which is at clause 2.9.24, and you asked us to do a readability of the section regarding children's safeguarding arrangements. We have done that. These amendment, and we've checked these amendments as well with the Director of Children's Services. So those are the clause as presented in the revised constitution that you've got before you today. We also then went to section 4 and scrutiny functions, and you asked us to look at further examples for the health health and also look at public health, and that it was a cross-cutting function rather than a strategic function. So that's moved into the cross-cutting scrutiny committee, SMB. The oversight of the children's improvement programme, that's now been added to the children's scrutiny committee function, and planning, regulatory and licensing have also been added to the functions of connected communities. We also looked at the oversight of the council's companies, such as Hoople, and that's been added to the functions of the Scrutiny Management Board as a cross-cutting function. We also then talked about a number of amendments to the A&G functions and the independent and the appointment of an independent member and the voting position of independent member. I don't propose going through those now because we, as Claire explained, we've carved out A&G, review of A&G functions as they need re-looking at in the light of the new guidance. We also looked at public questions and the scope of public questions at clause 4.1.40 and a question that may be rejected by the monitoring officer because it's deemed as not appropriate. And you asked us to consider putting back in one of the possible areas for rejection, and that is when a word count for a public question is more than 140 words. So on the basis of our current analysis of handling questions that come in, we've put that word count back into one of the exemptions at 4.1.40. And then you also asked us to look at when we compile a glossary for the Constitution, which it isn't here today because that still needs to be done when we represent the Constitution. Would we look at the Oxford English definition of questions? So we'll do that as part of the review of the Constitution. Then you asked us to look at scrutiny rules and clause 4.5.4 and that clause is titled "Who may sit on a scrutiny committee," and you asked us to look at this clause and as it looked at if this looked at the direct work that members were being involved in, and therefore they couldn't be involved in scrutinising a decision, and was there sufficient wording that dealt with work directly on something else, either as a cabinet support member or as another member working on something directly that scrutiny was looking at? Did that preclude them? We felt that we would leave it as drafted, as it does deal with the degree of involvement a member has, and so a member makes that decision in terms of the degree of involvement they've had on a matter that scrutiny may be reviewing. So we left that clause as it was drafted. In terms of planning, there were a number of technical queries raised about planning, and as Claire said, you've got a revised supplement, and there was email exchange and meetings between legal services and Councillor Watson. Thank you, Councillor Watson, for your helpful involvement, and so you have before you a revised section of the planning code and guidance, and the specific queries that were referred to have actually been picked up by those conversations. We then moved on to looking at the role of the independent panel under the employment panel functions at section 9, 4.9, and we've now referenced independent persons in relation to employment matters, so that and the role of independent persons, so that this is set out, so that this gives context to their role in employment matters. And we've also you also asked us to consider where the definition of an independent panel should be, and that's the independent panel for dealing with the dismissal or dismissal of a chief officer and a chief executive, and the independent panel and is now set out. The definition is now set out at clause 2.8.20. So those were the particular amendments that we picked up in terms of further additional amendments to the Constitution after you'd had your read through.
Thanks, Kate. So what I'd like to explain to the committee is kind of what the next steps are, because what this report is doing is just honing in on the changes that are needed to the Constitution, but that's only one part of the process. That's about the structure and what it looks like, not how it's going to work. There will be a huge amount of work set out in paragraph 9 in relation to the operational changes that are required. So this is the kind of culture change that will come as a result of having an enhanced scrutiny function, but also a revised forward plan, which is already being undertaken, how we're going to undertake key decision consultation over a remote meeting platform rather than by email, etc. That work will all take place between March and May. The plan is, if you're happy for this to proceed to Council, then this will go to Council for adoption in March, then implementation May 2022.
Thank you, Claire, for that. Questions from committee? Councillor Watson.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd really like to say I have been part of the Rethinking Governance Working Group, and I have to say thank you to the officers, Claire, Caroline, Kate, Alice. It really has been quite the 2 years, and it has actually been a real honour for me to actually oversee the planning section. I've learned an awful lot, and unfortunately my colleagues are now tired of me spouting the clauses of the Constitution regarding planning, but that's never a bad thing. I would like to say thanks to Christy, Councillor Balderson, for chairing the Rethinking Governance Working Group, because she's really kept hold of the ship and kept a really good oversight throughout the 2 years. To Jenny Bartlett for making sure around the scrutiny, and it really can't be underestimated how much work has actually gone into this project. I think what I would request, and I hope my colleagues will not think that I'm not being politically correct, but I would really like to have the Lib Dems more engaged in the next part of the review. I think that it's just been a shame that the Liberal Democrat representative hasn't been able to come to every meeting or engage as closely as many of us have been. So hopefully that will change in the next part, because as Claire has mentioned, we have got a significant amount of work to continue. We're going to review it in a year and see how it goes, and then there are things to be picked up on, like the licensing requirements and legislation, and it's an organic process. But Kate, I've just got one question. It's with regard to, it's on page 294 of our pack, 5.8.23, and please forgive me because we've had so many meetings, is there a reason why we took out the last part of this last sentence, which is on any grounds detailed in the section above, which is 5.8.19, about where the chairperson can reject a supplementary question in consultation with the monitoring officer, stroke legal officer, at the meeting. Can you remember why we took out the words "the grounds"? Yeah, thanks, Claire.
I can recall, because I think this is the version I first looked at. It was because at one point we weren't going to have any grounds at all, if you remember. And then what we've done is we've looked at that extent, haven't we? And then we've come back. So actually, we could include that back in. I would suggest that would be an amendment.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
So, Ben, have you picked that up?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Alderson?
Thank you, Chair, and I think if we're following on from Councillor Watson's thanks to everybody on the committee, a huge thanks has to go back to her as well. I mean, it was a massive amount of work. And moving forwards, I think at the beginning of the officer's report, it does outline the members of the Rethinking Governance Working Group, and I understand that with also the change in parties and groups within the members, that Councillor Selden and Councillor Watson will be replaced by Councillor Harvey going forward. So we do appreciate all the hard work that you've put into the committee, so thank you very much for that.
Thank you for that. It's worth noting that, as Claire mentioned, the section on the audit and governance responsibilities hasn't yet been reviewed, I think, in its final form, following some late comment and changes suggested by the 151 officer by the working group. And therefore, that needs to be done before it comes to committee. I'd like, obviously, to get this work done as soon as possible, and I believe, Ben, that we have a tentative date, have we, of the 21st of February? Is that right?
That's correct, Chair, yes. In order to clearly for the work to be done, but also to make sure that that can be dealt with before the agenda is published for Council later that week, that it meets the March deadline.
And that presumes that there will be agreement following the work, following a review by the working group and its recommendations to this committee, and that we accept the recommendations for the responsibilities going forwards. So I think that's the best way to deal with that. I didn't feel comfortable bringing that paper to the meeting today before the working group had a chance to review it. Any further comments? Councillor?
So I'm not totally clear. Are you therefore saying that the recommendation A today can't be completed on that basis because we haven't got the complete entity?
The recommendation A can be completed because the particular appendice which contains the audit and governance responsibilities isn't included in this pack. So
it's a partial.
It's a partial, all apart from that particular appendice. And as in addition, because that appendice deals with responsibilities of this committee, I wanted the additional time for us to be able to look at that and consider the changes which were suggested by the 151 officer. I think, Claire, following some reports that were published.
Yeah, there's a new SIPFA prudential code, which is lengthy, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Which whole hands wasn't aware of. So it's just to make sure that's included.
If possible, on the 21st, recognising that and the members of the working group are also members of this committee, we might be able to have a workshop prior to an short ordinary governance meeting, so that we can go through the changes and they'll be explained to us in some detail before we consider them for inclusion in the report to Council on March the 4th. I felt that was an appropriate method of dealing with the issue.
Is there any risk that the consideration of that appendix might have an effect on any of the 1 to 27 that we are being asked to approve today? If so, then just needs to be an amendment to that recommendation subject to the approval of the particular appendix.
Claire?
I can confirm it's a standalone document.
Thank you.
Thank you. So further questions, queries, observations? Looking around. Right. Before we come to the recommendations, I'd obviously like to echo, we seem to be thinking one another, but it does come down to anybody that looks at this huge tome. A huge thanks to Councillor Alderson, Councillor Bartlett, Councillor Watson, and the other members of the Working Party, and the officers who have been almost entombed in this document, and will be for a little while longer, I suspect. My only concern, and I'll voice it here, I see we have 70k in the budget to finance this additional scrutiny groups. I'm fearful, not necessarily that is not an appropriate sum of money, but I'm fearful that coming at a time when officers have been under considerable strain and stress, we've had areas where we've not been fully staffed. It will take some good project management, I think, to get these committees up and running for May. I'd just ask Finance to take a look at that 70k and see whether it really reflects what might be some start-up costs, if I put it that way, in assuring that this new method of working starts in a really positive, proactive and successful way. I would hate for us to becoming, thinking 6 months down the line, well, that didn't work very well, did it? And what are the reasons why? Well, we didn't resource it well enough. I leave those comments just lying on the table, but I have that concern. So recommendations in regard to the work. Sorry.
I would just like to reassure the committee, we haven't had a dedicated resource on this, and I think there have been times when that would have been useful. The plan is to have some dedicated resource on this to get us to May. Okay.
I much appreciate the assurance. I'm sure the committee do as well. Thank you for that. Turning to the recommendations, A, having regard to work undertaken by the Rethinking Governance Working Group, the revised constitution is set out Appendix 1 to 27, and the planning rules and codes included in Supplement 1 be recommended to full council for adoption with implementation with effect from 20th of May 2020, and B, that authority be delegated to the Director of Law and Governance to make technical amendments, grammatical, formatting and consistency, one of which I've already spotted, necessary to finalise the revised constitution. Can I have a show of hands? Thank you. Right, I'm now going to move to item 11, the annual report and code of conduct, and then I'll move to item 10, annual government statement actions. So item 11, annual report and code of conduct, purpose to enable the committee to ensure that high standards of conduct continue to be promoted and maintained, to provide an overview of the arrangements for dealing with complaints, except working together with views related to standards panel sampling reviews. Presenting officer Claire Ward, and Claire, thank you.
Thank you. I'd like the committee to know as well, we've also got Drake Barrier attending remotely, who's one of our independent persons. Independent persons support this process, as you know, and I'll start with that. We have had 2 resignations during the period, but I still have 4 independent persons to assist me in my role. I'm very grateful for the role that they provide, making sure there's a check and balance, I'm not having a bad day or a too lenient day, but also providing support to those that are going through the process. It can't be underestimated the impact that this has on any councillor who is subject to a code of conduct complaint. We're on the cusp of change in relation to standards because, as you've seen, there has been a national code now produced following the 2011 Localism Act, where it was all left to us all to do our own thing. And we've also got new arrangements. So I am recommending that we go out to consult now with our own membership and with the town and parish councils to see what their views are on the new code. But in relation to what the last year has been like, the same real amount of complaints, not been a dip in a year, about 50, we go between 50 and 60 complaints a year. The themes have been very similar. Lack of respect is the key. I wondered over lockdown actually whether we would have less complaints, but I think as a result of remote meetings, perhaps more people saw committee meetings. They were more accessible, but also I think everyone had to adapt to behaviours online anyway. So it in some ways there wasn't more complaints, I suppose we should say. You'll see that there were 3 upheld complaints during the year, one related to behaviour and the other one related to acting outside of the role of a councillor, if I use that type of description. You'll also see that we've got a couple of parish councils that have a number of complaints, and that's something that's definitely on my radar to be considering. It's very difficult because as a monitoring officer, I'm only able to assist in code of conduct complaints, but a lot of those complaints relate to the manner, procedures, usually related to planning as well, I'll be honest, where there is a fallout. There's no other way of describing it. I think what's been unfortunate this year is that this again isn't a department that's resourced in itself. It is part of other people's day jobs, but we've always been really good on our timeliness, and Caroline keeps us straight and makes sure that we undertake our processes in a timely manner in accordance with our arrangements. But unfortunately last year that wasn't the case as a result of the COVID response and staff being redeployed to other duties. I did discuss that at length with the standards panel, but I think it's important because a ground of complaint is where there has been some procedural error, and actually a procedural error you could say is delay, and that could result therefore in a number of appeals going forward on that ground alone. So it is a concern to me that if that is a acceptable ground to go ahead, then there may be more appeals for our standards panel, which was a unintended consequence of resources that we had at the time to deal with this. There are a number of appeals that are still pending, and as a team that work on this, we meet twice a year with the independent persons to improve what we're doing. We're always looking at ways to, I suppose, reduce the number of complaints and ensure that the Nolan principles are complied with. And overall, we haven't got a huge problem. But obviously, it's something we do need to keep sure is centre of what we do. And I think putting the Nolan principles at the front of all our agenda packs is one way of doing it, and I'm grateful that we had that recommendation from this committee last year and were able to action it. The only other thing I need to say, I think, is in relation to your actions at Appendix 3, a number of them are completed or haven't been started because of the work that the LGA were doing on the code, but we'll continue to track those changes. And the last thing will be to say that training of parish and our own councillors hasn't taken place during COVID, but that again will be something that we will rectify this year.
Thanks Claire. I've got a few questions or points here. But before asking those, again, I'd like to echo my thanks to the independent persons for the work they do, sort of unsung and unremunerated, especially assisting those, I appreciate assisting Claire, but more importantly assisting those councillors who have issues raised against them. It cannot be a very pleasant place to be, but having someone sage to be a source of advice there must be a great comfort. So big thanks to them, and I hope that can be passed on. In terms of the report, just some comments. Paragraph 18, which refers to the 4 existing dispensations for councillors, which council councillors which remain live. That link there takes you to the full page of all councillors. It's then incumbent to actually go through each councillor to see if there's a dispensation. I'm just wondering if there could be it would be a piece of work to be done, but just to look at having a link to actually the dispensations. Because if you don't know a councillor's got a dispensation, you will be looking through each and every councillor to find out where they are. And there's 53 at the moment, 52 of us at the moment. It takes a while, and I'm just thinking that's something that could be clarified. So that's a request, probably action. Item 20, referring to no recourse to refer any code of conduct complaint to the police. Very pleased to hear that. I'm just wondering whether it could be tabulated in a similar way to the tabulation in paragraph 25. Because my suspicion is that it's very, very rare to refer a code of conduct complaint to police. And I'm pleased to see that we've got data going back here to 2013. If you could have another column which says whatever referrals to the police are, again, it provides reassurance that we're fairly squeaky clean in that regard.
From memory, I've referred 2 matters to the police over the last 6 years.
Right. Yeah. As I thought, that's fairly minor. Yeah, I can see that there's an additional recommendation been put in C, the consultation of this council together with all parish and town councils adopting the LGA and code of conduct and entry is commenced. I'm just wondering whether HALC should be brought into that consultation. Again, we really look for training from HALC and NALC for parish councils to keep them well advised of the known principles and their actions so that they don't fall foul of the standards. And I'd like to see them brought into this consultation as part of the activity. And just one further comment, I'm sorry to hold this a bit. Paragraph, it's on page 93, I can't read the paragraph. paragraph 13. That's the new code of ethics. Code of conduct complaints. I'm just thinking about complaints when they get made by people who don't have English as their sort of first language. And I'd just like to understand how or if there is any support for such complainants, either through, I don't know, citizen advice or whatever. How do we, I don't know if we've ever had a complaint through that route, but how would we go about supporting somebody who had difficulty in making themselves coherently understood? And reading some of the complaints that have come forward in a different role, sitting on standards, I can understand that sometimes getting to the gist of what the issues are can be an issue for yourself, Claire, and the independent member. But I don't know whether the independent member, perhaps, or independent person can provide that guidance. I don't know. I'll leave that as an open question for you.
Yes, happy to take that away and think about that. Thank you.
Sorry, I've been speaking for longer than I did. Any other questions on this? Councillor Bolson.
I thought I'd beat you to it, Councillor Watson. I just have two really quick questions, really for clarification for me. Paragraph 26 on page 9 about PAC. In the table 20, my mod.gov doesn't seem to be working. So you have still open complaints appeals received for 2021-12, but in the paragraphs above, I think it was 5. So I just wanted to confirm that it's 5 complaints, but because those complaints relate to more than one councillor, it therefore is listed as 12. Is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Great, thank you. And then my second question relates to Appendix 1, which is my notebook has just fallen down.
Recommendations from the standards panel.
Yes, it was recommendations from the standards panel. There's one action in there about referring who can make a complaint.
Yes.
And I just wanted to make sure that my understanding is correct, because and whether it's just terminology or not, but I know one of the things that I was quite keen to better understand is who can refer the complaint, because I think the example that we had in this instance was where a member of the public might ask a question, and in a supplementary or at some stage during a committee meeting might raise a complaint or make a complaint, and whether the chairperson of that committee has the right to refer that complaint on. So I wouldn't necessarily have thought that it was the chair actually making the complaint, but it was referring that complaint. So I just wanted to make sure that this is one of the same, and whether the terminology does make a difference or not.
Yes, I think it was recommendation 5. It said that the arrangements for dealing with code of conduct may be amended to make it clear who can make a complaint, and that covers, you remember at standards panel we discussed the leadership principle from Nolan, and what does the role of a chairperson in that meeting mean? Is their ability to make complaints, and also in relation to the monitoring officer referring, and also members self-referring themselves. So it will cover all those scenarios.
So there's not a difference in terminology in between referring and making. I guess I might just be becoming a bit too legal.
Yeah, I think it's making it. It's who can make a complaint is what we need to be clear on.
Okay, thank you. That's all the clarification I wanted. Thank you.
Councillor Watson,
Yeah.
slow off the mark this time.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. Thanks for this report, Claire. I was also, my first point is to actually, on page 94 of our pack, is about paragraph 28, to see that the number of allegations of failure to declare interest has actually reduced. So that's really good, and it demonstrates that there is some change, and with the training that's going on. I actually shared with the chair and the clerk of Walford Parish Council that they head up this year's number of complaints, and last year it was equal with Langarum. And actually the chair asked me a good question, actually, because she was saying that she's a new chair, and it's going to be her ambition for next year that Walford will not be the top of the list of number of complaints, and when we say Walford Parish Council, it's often not about the councillors, it's about councillors or council in that council. But she was asking, is it possible to have a breakdown of the statistics to provide to, the parish council, whether the complaint was made by a resident, by a parish councillor or a heritage councillor, because she felt that would then demonstrate where they needed to work, on their, in their terms of their training. So I thought that was, a fair request. Is that feasible?
Yes, we can provide that.
Oh, great.
As long as that information doesn't identify an individual, which I think it would, then absolutely fine.
Oh, that's great. And my other question regarding is it compulsory for parish councillors to complete a declaration of interest form?
Yes, it is, within 28 days.
And what happens if they don't?
Then it's a breach of the code.
Right.
It's not a criminal offence. Not a criminal offence. No, it's not. It's in law. You have to do it, but it's not a criminal offence.
Okay. Right.
It would be a breach of the code.
Right. Thank you for that. And last but not least, I know I've said it to you in a pre-meeting, but Appendix 2, in terms of the Local Government Association Model Councillor Code of Conduct, I think it's brilliant. I think that it's really does explain, goes beyond like the novel and the principles, but actually really makes it very clear. And I think that would be very helpful, as the chair has pointed out, to HALC and NALC. And I really recommend that to, through the HALC as well. So thank you for that.
Thanks. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just how much training do parish councillors have to have? How much is optional, if at all?
It's all optional.
It's all optional. I thought they didn't even have to think about code of conduct or.
No, I can't force any training. I do provide it. I said over lockdown I didn't, but I do provide it. The only people that are mandatory is Heritage Council. That is mandatory.
Thank you. Should we think about making a difference to parish councillors?
I have no power to do
so.
No
power to do that.
It's advisory only, I'm afraid.
Thank you. So it might be up to local members?
Yes, I mean anyone can request training from myself or from HALC or from other providers. Often when I make a recommendation that someone is trained, I don't always say you must be trained by me either, but sometimes I will say you need to be trained by the Heritage Council monitoring officer. So that's the only mandatory part, I would say, and that's on an individual basis. And obviously if they don't comply with that recommendation, then it's into standards panel.
Right, so if they, yes.
But that's only if there's already been a breach.
Been a breach, then they have to do something about it.
Yes.
Thank you.
But I think it's advisory. I think if you talk to any of your clerks in any of your wards, they will be providing some degree of training. And I say it's on our list to make sure there's training this year.
Right.
Councillor Watson.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Just to follow up on Councillor Bowen's question, how many times does a parish councillor have to, so how many, do they do it once or do they get told to have it more than once?
Depends on the breach.
Okay.
So yes, they can be repeat training, because that's all there. The sanctions
That's all there is.
That's all there is really. So an apology or training really.
Yes.
So people can be trained more than once.
Thanks, Councillor Watson. I just wanted to return to Appendix 1. We've got a list of recommendations there from the Tax Standards Panel held on the 12th of January 2022. Under our recommendations from this meeting, B, we will be recommending that those recommendations are considered and adopted as appropriate into the action tracker. Are we all content with that? Good, fine. Sorry, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you. I was just following on from that exchange of questions. So, with the model code of conduct, the LGA document that we're looking at, we sort of generally recommend to help and to parish councils that they can adopt this as well, and I know a lot of parish councils do automatically adopt the most up-to-date one in line with Herefordshire Council. But just when you said that it's not, for a parish councillor, they don't have to undertake any training. I noted in here on page 107 of the pack, so that's page 7 of the thing itself. Paragraph 8, complying with the Code of Conduct. As a councillor, I undertake Code of Conduct training provided by my local authority. That makes it sound like you do have to undertake some kind of training if you adopt this one.
If you adopt it, then it will become, and then it will be a breach of the code if you don't.
Right. So that's so that would actually then change that answer, that you don't, as a parish councillor, you don't have to undertake any training, but if it's set out in a code of conduct that you have adopted as that parish, then you would have to comply with any training needs that are set out in that. Okay, thank you.
And there are some differences of this code compared to what we've got now. I personally feel it's best to consult on all of it, and then we'll bring it back to this committee about what the changes are, what the differences are. Do we want to modify it? What's the national picture as well? There are two particular places that I see as differences. One is in relation to gifts and hospitality. The level's different, and in relation to Schedule 2 interests, the list is different. Those are the two areas that I think are particular to look at.
Thanks, Claire, and a good observation, Councillor Bartlett, on that change, I think, in the new Code of Conduct. What I was coming on to was suggesting that the recommendations A to D, A, that the annual report of the Code of Conduct complaints be reviewed, any areas of further work identified for inclusion work programme. I think there's some actions that we've asked to be included. Recommendations from the Standards Panel advising this committee, Appendix 1, following their annual sampling exercise considered and adopted as appropriate in the action tracker, plus consultation with all members of this council together with all parish and town councils, and possibly including HALC on adopting the OGA model Code of Conduct and arrangements is commenced. But D, the committee note the progress outlined in the Code of Conduct Action Tracker as mentioned by Claire and attached as Appendix 3. Are we all content? Are there any changes to the recommendations?
I noticed that the HALC one was the change to C, wasn't it? But in terms of actions, essentially it's around the dispensations granted to Herefordshire Council councillors be summarised in a single location on the council's website. But a number of complaints referred to police, even if nil, be included in the complaints received table and future reports, and also just that general breakdown of the origin of complaints to be provided to all.
Thank you. Are we all content? Good for those? Yep. Thank you very much. Just moving then to agenda item 10, the annual governance statement 2021 actions. Based on the final version of the annual governance statements agreed on September 2021, an action plan has been formed based on continuous improvement requirements. This report provides a half-year review of the actions. The report also outlines future arrangements for producing the annual governance statement. Andrew, your name is in the frame, I believe, to talk us through this.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yes, my name is in the frame. We have the attachment with the action plan, so I'm happy to take any questions about it.
So just before we do, recommendations that we will be considering are that A, that the committee considers the mid-year actions based on the identified continuous improvement points in the 2020-21 annual governance statement, and B, the committee considers arrangements for the 2021-22 annual governance statement. And I'd like questions. That's awesome.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm not usually on every case, but yeah. On page, actually I'll go with page 86 and 87, is that we have a pre-meeting and Natalia Silva was answering some of the questions. So I was asking about Action 13 about producing a COVID recovery plan, and I'm just led to believe that the interim director was just late with the deadline. So, but with that one, what I would really like to understand is about the links with the resilience plans, because COVID recovery plan, I understand, is health-based. But actually, when you're looking at the logistics of health services, and it links to our the earlier report from the external audit progress from the ministry, is that you can see how, like the adult health service was really impacted by COVID. So it's kind of like seeing how this COVID recovery plan actually links with the resilience plan in terms of meeting. And I know that resilience plans are often about responses rather than actually building resilience, which can be quite confusing. So that was one of my questions. And my other question...
While you're looking at that, I'm not sure that's a question that Andrew would be best able
to answer. Okay.
Well, Chair, thank you for that. I'm very happy to take that question away, but I'm not close to the detail of that.
No.
It's a very valid point, and we'll make sure that it gets passed on to Becky.
Great,
so
thanks.
Take that as an action to be passed on.
Yeah.
And you had a second question.
Yes, I did. Yeah, and Councillor Bartlett actually asked me a question about it, and I thought it was a really good one. And it was about strategic partnerships, and I've lost my page 82, paragraph 6. I know that the local family justice board, and I do go on about this one, but what Councillor Bartlett picked out was actually, we have the directorate in the report, the reports about significant partnerships. I forgot what you call them now. The breakdown of the aims, objectives, etc. But it doesn't actually have the governance level, which is around the cabinet member for those reports that the teams do. So I was just going to pick up on that one. I'm looking at Claire to help me. What are those sheets called that the management team have to complete on these partnerships?
Oh gosh, I can't remember what they're called. No. What's it called?
I'm going to just...
Might be called an assurance statement. Might be called an assurance statement. And it's about three pages of A4 to go through. But in relation to the youth justice one, if that's the one this relates to, it's just because of changeover of staff, I'm afraid. There's just been so many lead officers looking at it that I'm afraid it just hasn't got to the right person. Yeah. but that's what I'm sure it's called an assurance statement. I think that's.
Yeah, I'm just going to quickly now look. I think you're right, but it was on those assurance statements. There's no kind of like governance in the sense of it's only got the directorate, you know, so the lead director or who actually completes the form, but there's no like with the cabinet member with their portfolio. And I was just wondering if that was necessary to kind of like overseeing the governance.
It's all under review. I don't know which action it is, but you know, it's been happening here for a long time, I'm afraid, because I put it on. It's becoming more and more urgent. But if you look at Action 8, Partnership Governance Review, that's all part of that.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, just a reflection, I think, on the status implications of some of these actions, which often is not complete, part complete, and complete. They're very much a step change in activity. I'm sure some of those part completes, well, I hope some of those part completes are nearly complete, and where we're saying not complete, they actually reflect where things have been begun, but they're not gained enough traction to get big part complete. So there's an awful lot of actions is the other reflection, I suppose, that I have, and it's difficult without recognising the background to see which of these actions perhaps have or should have more priority than others. So that's again a reflection. And if I'm just wanted to refer to things like 21, action, motion of the fellow council member reflecting the flexibility within these virtual meetings. Now, we've got a status of part complete here, but remote meeting regulations have not continued in operation. So I'm wondering where we actually close out an action because the world has changed. In this instance, I'm also reflecting that, well, we do still have virtual meetings, but they're not public meetings, they're training events. I'm struggling to see how you complete that action in the legal framework where we're not allowed to meet virtually as a meeting. So again, perhaps to look at some of these, I'm sure a review of some of these actions could see some more of them becoming complete or nearly fully complete. I don't know if you want to comment on my observation.
I think that's right, Chair, and I also think a number of them go over a number of years. You know, these aren't the quick fixes happen anyway. These are long term that take more than a year anyway. It's one thing, isn't it, to think about the risk policy. It's one thing to create a new risk policy. Another thing then to do all the training, then to embed it, and then to do a maturity audit. You know, some of these actions will take more than a year.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor Watson.
Oh, right, I'll leave.
Sorry, Councillor, who was first?
I'll leave. Councillor Watson first.
I'll jump in. Just on that point, we get this at a 6 month point, and I think leading on from that, which I think Councillor Shaw did articulate, I find it difficult if this is an update. If something's not complete, I don't get any update. So I don't think it's necessarily delivering, if this is meant to be updating us on the actions at a 6 month point. And I mean, similar to the outstanding internal audit recommendations, we now have something saying, well, we think that it's on track to be implemented for the end of the year, or if it's on track to be implemented by that particular due date. And I don't get any idea of some of those actions in here, and also just some little examples. So action 16, I think it is, implement improvement plan for value for money on the public realm contract. This is of supreme interest, I think, to most members, because this is what we get hounded about all the time. and the evidence that's part complete with just improvement board overseeing the improvement process, but it doesn't give very much flesh to that. So in some respects, it's great that we've got it there, but I probably would be seeking a little bit more information on some of these points, just to make it, our responsibility to look at the media actions. Some of these things, there's a lot of work going on, but there's nothing reported in the report against that action to reflect that. So that if that would be a request for maybe an improvement next time we get the 6 monthly report, that we actually just get a little bit more flesh around what those actions are.
I'm cautious if we asked for instance, a date of an anticipated date by which the action will be completed, where we would be in danger of replicating our own action tracker and dates. However, there's nothing better than focusing the mind than having a deadline, and it may be that those senior leads on these actions should be asked to suggest some deadline dates here so that we can reflect on them. Some of them, as Claire says, if they're long-term implementations, they may be 2 or 3 years hence, but I think everyone then has to recognise that the timescale of the action being completely implemented is what it is. Obviously, as that runs, then, as deadlines always do draw near, don't they? It would help focus management attention on undertakings that are given. Perhaps. I'm not sure it might be our recommendation to do that. I think perhaps the management board needs to consider whether that would be helpful. I'm always cautious of putting pressure on management to do these sort of things, but if we don't, then, as Claire suggests, some of these actions can drift. And as membership of this committee changes, their drift is not recognised anyway, apart from in the corporate knowledge. Councillor Watson.
No, thank you, Chair. That's really valuable points, because that was actually going to be my point as well, because we've got, 10 weeks to the end of the financial year, and it's just really good to know how many will be completed before that financial year and how many will roll over to the next financial year. And rather than just not complete or part complete, it would be just really good to have that. And I agree, it's not to give more work, but it really allows us to, see the length of time, because it's really about what are the consequences of the carryovers, and in terms of our own governance. I think it's where it's coming from. Thank you.
Any other comments, suggestions? So recommendation A and B, consider complete your actions based on identified continuous improvement points and committee consider arrangements for the 2021-22 statement. I think our comment would be, probably you've captured that bin, that we'd like to see some kind of representation of an action completion date or a projected action completion date, which should be provided by the senior lead or their team to be identified within the action plan. And I'm presuming that the annual government statement for 21-22 is going to have some actions coming out of it, which are going to be added to this, and it's important that we consider the timelines for these things. Ben, have I missed any?
No, it's just also an update on how the COVID plan will link to wider resilience plans, particularly in terms of adult social care, and as you say, management will be able to consider the matter about projected anticipated dates.
Okay, that's a specific one. Anything else? No? Are we all content with that? Aye? Yeah. Thank you. That just leaves item 13, the work programme update. Thank you, Ben, for providing us with a printout of these, which is really long. So you can see the work programme then for March, what we're getting, those items. There's nothing that's been added to that list at the moment, is there?
Not at this stage, Chair, although we do need to slot in the extra February meeting into the schedule. Yeah.
That's right. So we've got a March meeting on Tuesday the 15th of March, but we will, by necessity, need to have an additional short February meeting. Whether or not we combine that with the, I know we penciled in a date for the training on value for money audit and the new regulations, whether we want to keep those separate or whether we want to have them on the same date.
Certainly, Chair, the 20th, Monday the 21st is one of the dates that you and Vice Chair suggested were potentially feasible for that. So, so we could see if the finance team would help us to facilitate a training session on the VFM.
So we could have a working group, a meeting of the working group to consider the changes to, or a workshop to consider the changes to the A&G responsibilities, a A&G meeting to approve or otherwise those changes, and then a session on training on the value for money audit regulations while we're all together. I recognise that the training would normally have occurred virtually probably, but if we're all here for that audit committee meeting, it does make some sense to utilise the time that we're together. And I think Councillor Bowen, as you are an oft appearing substitute on this committee, will extend the invitation, obviously, to you.
Well, that's very kind of you, thank you. I appreciate that.
Okay.
I'm sure Councillor Matthews will be here as well.
I was just wondering, did you ask for comment from the independent panel person? Or I know that you thanked the person, but did you ask for comment from him? I can't remember.
I don't believe I did.
Oh, okay, right, okay.
So
I was just, yeah.
Yeah, if is he still on there?
Harry, yes.
I do apologise to the independent member present on the call if they'd like to make any comment in relation to the section on standards or any other section really. Be very welcome to hear your comments, and my apologies for not asking at the time.
Well, apologies accepted, Chair. It's very nice to be here and see how the council works occasionally and to be reminded. Standards are clearly of great interest at the moment, just looking at what's happening in Westminster, and certainly the Nolan principles are a matter of great interest. So it's good to see that we seem to be more abreast of matters than perhaps other parts of the governance community. I just make one point about about parish councils, and Claire had alluded to this. The Localism Act in 2011 changed the structure for standards, and effectively took parish councils out of any sort of formal structure for monitoring and support. And there's now a view that perhaps that might not be a good idea, and perhaps a move towards bringing parish councils back in. Those who watched Handforth Parish Council, the events there, will recall that things can go wrong elsewhere. However, that would require legislative change, and at the moment we have to work with the law that we have, which really leaves parish councils to decide how they run themselves and are only accountable to their own voters. Whether that's satisfactory or not is a matter for presumably the public to decide ultimately, but my own view as an independent person is that it doesn't work. I think that's all I'd like to say.
Well, thank you, and thank you for having the interest to bear with us through our meeting this morning, and once again, thank you to you and all your colleagues who help us out as independent persons. And that really brings me, I think, to the end of the meeting. I'd like to thank all the officers for their work in preparing papers for the meeting, for our clerk for his work, the communications team, and all members for the work you put in. And if we can now stop the live transmission.
Thank you for that.